Welcome to Women in the Arena podcast, the podcast celebrating women doing extraordinary things in plain sight. I'm your host, Audra Egan, and our mission is to elevate the value, strength, and resilience each woman brings to the world. Without further delay, let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining me for Season 4 of Women in the Arena podcast. This season, we are going to challenge ourselves. We are going to grow. We're going to stretch. We're going to push ourselves outside our comfort zone, and we're going to do some things that we have been dreaming to do. As I have said before, I may be the one behind the mic, but I don't do this by myself. I do this with all of you. Thank you all for joining me today, and let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining me again this week. This week, we're going to talk about the opportunity to change your mind, to have new dreams, have new adventures, and explore other professions using the skills you already have. Asha Aravindakshan is my guest this week, and she is a corporate executive, a startup advisor, and a careers strategist. She's also the master of making something out of nothing and creating careers that are brand new to you with using the tools that you already have. It is both my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Asha. Asha, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Audra, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Oh, thank you for being here. And you and I get to talk about a really fun topic, although, at first blush, it might be a little intimidating about changing because nobody likes that word change. It's kind of a scary thing. But for you and I, we look at it as opportunity and fun. Asha, you know that everybody knows that I made a change during the pandemic, and I know that you did too. So what did you do during the pandemic?
Audra, that's such a great question. During the pandemic, I took the time to write a book. And I wrote this book to help all the people that got laid off at the beginning of the pandemic, laid off in the best economy that we've ever seen in our lives. And all of a sudden they were thrust into a job market, isolated and alone at home and not able to network and to find the roles that would make them happy. And so I took my learnings of how you could do a job search, how you could do networking virtually, and how you could tell your story through transferable skills to tell them how they could find success in this market. And what turned out is 10 months later, when I published the book, The Great Resignation all of a sudden was in the headlines. And so we have people who were challenging the norm by saying, I want a better work-life balance. I want to be happy at work. I want a company that matches my values. And so the book landed in people's hands at a different time, but the story was still the same. They wanted to be happy, and I could help them with the stories that were in my book.
So first of all, what's the name of your book?
Oh, yes. It's called Skills, the Common Denominator.
Yeah, I love that title because you're basically saying just because you're not in the same industry doesn't mean that you lose your skills. They're still just as valuable as they were in maybe the primary industry you were working for, but it doesn't make them any less value in using them into something else.
I love that summary. That's exactly right. And so you can keep those skills that are core to you. And whether those are hard skills, soft skills, life skills, job skills, they're transferable. And they're your common denominator that you take from one piece of your career to the next. And not only in your career, but those extracurricular activities that you may have at home with your family, volunteer life, you can use them all over the place. And sometimes we compartmentalize them and we don't use them in one context or another. And we need to start doing that. We need to bring our full selves, our holistic selves to what we're doing.
What I have noticed in the last 2 years is everybody got the opportunity to slow down. Everybody had to go to this giant timeout. And then we were just so busy doing that none of us had a chance to actually stop and think. And then everybody stopped and was gave it a little bit of time to start to marinate about their lives. And some of it was forced because at the beginning of the pandemic it was really scary because nobody knew what was happening. All of a sudden all industry was shedding jobs and nobody knew what to do. So let's first focus on that space of okay, your industry shed jobs and now you're out of a job. And you have this book called Skills. What was the outcome of that? Because I'm sure that people were reading your book and going, "Oh, well, I guess I could do that." So what kind of stories did you hear, at least in the beginning of the pandemic, for those that were seeking new employment and trying to use their current skills into a launch pad to do something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so what I started hearing when I started my interviews was, people didn't know where to start. They didn't know, like, all of a sudden, especially when they're laid off, you have a sense of loss and you have to process that. And that's hard, right? And so getting past that hurdle, then all of a sudden it's like, you have the skills, you are capable, you are worthy of that next job. Just like kind of like rebuild the confidence is what's important to then go out there and say, okay, what do I want to do next? Do I want to keep doing the same role in the same industry? Or do I want to change the role or the industry? Because if you start to make the changes, you need to go beyond your network into second or third degree connections to help you make those changes. And so people, they figured it out by accident what they needed to do, whereas I was trying to systematize it through the stories in the book and the frameworks that I created in the book to show people like you can make these changes and it doesn't have to be daunting. You can de-risk the process by following a framework. And so with the stories that I started collecting, some people did make the changes during the pandemic and they all made them through connections. Somebody else opened the door to an opportunity.
So they all started talking to each other on purpose.
On purpose, right? They're on purpose. They're talking about themselves and what they want to do, and somebody else is making the connection perhaps on their skills and what they want to do and what they have available in the companies around them, and then making those introductions or connections, warm referrals into those organizations. Because you have to put it out there, you have to be vulnerable. Otherwise, the change won't happen on your own.
Yeah, because we all pretend and put on this face that we've got it all together, and the reality is none of us have it together at all.
Right.
We are just making it through day to day and figuring it out every single day because none of us, absolutely not a one of us, has this figured out.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I haven't met anybody who's got it figured out.
No, and you think about like a work, you have a team structure where if you don't know something, somebody else does, reinforces each other. Where you play a sport, there's a team structure. But finding a job is a solo activity.
Which is silly. I mean, because it's a solo activity that you're going to join a team.
Yes,
Kind of
exactly.
silly.
And so you need to have like the reinforcements. And I even share in my own story in chapter 1 how like I use a resume coach. I used an executive coach when I was going through job transitions. Like you cannot do this alone. I put on Facebook that I'm looking for a job. People responded with leads, right? You have to put it out there. You have to ask for help. You have to be willing sometimes to spend money on it in order to get where you want to go, especially if you're looking to do a bigger role in a bigger capacity in a bigger company. And so I think once people start to understand it's okay to do these things, or maybe they didn't even know that they could do these things, right? Because they're so used to, maybe when they started job hunting, it was mailing a resume to a company to be considered, right? Now they understand they have to use digital tools like LinkedIn and other social media to represent their brand. They have to make connections. They have to keep them warm, right? That's really
Absolutely.
important as well, right? Staying in touch with people. Like it's a different ball game out there, and people have to be ready for it.
What's your favorite story from interviewing people for the research of your book?
Oh, that's like picking a favorite child, Audra.
Okay, well, let's not use the word favorite. Let's pick the one that was the most surprising. How's that?
Okay, most surprising story of the 25 people that I have captured in the book would go to Jenny Leighton Guzman. So we volunteered together on the Alumni Association of her undergrad. So I knew
Okay.
her as like this super energetic volunteer from Texas, where she's from. She started the local alumni chapter, then now she's on the board of the university like I was. And I knew she worked in a bank, and she did corporate social responsibility in the bank, so very prestigious role. And I also knew she had studied master's in public affairs. So for me, it was always interesting to understand how that connected. But once I got on the phone with her a year ago to hear her story, she actually started her life in Houston. Her and her mom, they experienced homelessness for a while. So that was really surprising for me to learn. But then she had this opportunity to go on a class trip to Washington, D.C. Everyone has that trip in middle school and high school, right? And she fell in love with the nation's capital, and she knew that she wanted to study there. But when she graduated high school, she could afford to go to community college. So she goes to community college. She gets an internship with the local congressperson. She gets another volunteer opportunity somewhere else. Like she's working part-time, right? She's saving her money. She does one college application, and it's to the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where, she had gone on her visit. And she gets in, and she just like realized like she has such like a sense of responsibility in the world, because she's received this admissions to this private university in the nation's capital, and she wants to do better. And so she goes on to study political science. She goes on to get her master's in public affairs later on. And then, actually works as a fundraiser in a charter school for several
Oh,
years.
wow.
And
That's kind
so
of a different path.
very different path. And so she does this work. She has like a mentor who's actually another GW alumni that she meets in Houston, who's working with her to set up that regional chapter that I mentioned. And he kind of takes her under her wing to be like, this is how these the ropes, we'll get a position created for you in the school, all these type of things. She's one of those people who really vocalizes when she needs help. And I think that speaking up is a skill in its own. And so she, the people around her, she's like, hey, I want to learn how to write really good grants. I want to know how to fundraise properly. How do we talk to the donors? All that kind of thing. And then to a point where several years into this, she calls one of those donors at the bank to say, I really love what you do. How do I come join you on the other side of the table? And 2 weeks later, he calls back to say they created a role for her on the team,
Wow.
because she spoke up and she represented what she wanted to do and her interest, and they loved it, right? They said, we need someone like you on our team. And so she's been in that role. It's going to be 9 years now, progressively growing through the CSR group in the bank and helping the community that she grew up in, that she understands the struggles of. And for her in that role, her reflection was, how can you as a big corporate enterprise help this local community if you don't know the struggles of the community? But you have people like Jenny in the roles writing the checks now, right? She's no longer I call her the fundraiser to the check writer.
Which is fun. That's a whole lot more fun, is writing the checks.
Yeah, right. And she can see like this is the locus of power is there in the corporate enterprises, putting the money into the community's hands. But she's able, and her team are able to ascertain like, okay, which organizations need this. And I learned, Houston is a place that's really affected by climate change. Last
Oh,
year they had,
yeah.
like tornadoes, freak snowstorms, all these type of activities happening. And so there are lots of businesses, small businesses, nonprofits that serve the local community that get impacted by these local, climate change events and even the pandemic. And they reach out to her team for help. And so there's a lot of trust in the community for them to reach out for not just like monetary help, but like people going and volunteering and helping their cause. And so she organizes those events through her team. So that was for me one of like those stories, like you don't know people and the struggles that they deal with and what got them to here. And so we always have to have like that graciousness of understanding who's around us, who's on our teams, and the perspectives that they bring and what they're rooted in.
I think that that's a remarkable story about a young woman that knows exactly what she brings to the table and isn't afraid to ask for something new.
That's right.
And I think everybody should do that. If you know what you bring to the table, there's nothing that says that you can't take that and do something else, which brings us around to the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
And This is an interesting phenomenon. At the beginning of the pandemic, and the reason why I say that it's interesting is because it went from one extreme to the next
That's right.
in 2 short years. I mean,
In
when you
less
think
than
about
yeah.
it, that's not a long time.
No.
I mean, so beginning of the pandemic, we had companies shutting jobs. And then probably 8 months in, you saw businesses started to recover, hire people back, people are a little bit more stable. And then about when did the Great Resignation really start to take notice where you're like, "Oh, something's going on here."
So according to the BLS, it was September when 3% of the workforce voluntarily left their jobs from September on every month.
So September 2021.
September 2021, that's right. And so by the time it got to November was when the cumulative effect of that 3% leaving a month hit the headlines.
Yes. Then that's when they were like, 1 month is an anomaly. 2, we start to pay attention. 3 is a trend.
3 is a trend and a trend that has not stopped.
No. And this is what I find so interesting about this is that, again, since we all slowed down and we had so much on our plates, uh, there was schooling from home, but at the same time, there was family dinners again.
That's right.
There was watching movies at home as a family again, family game night, all of this stuff. And people had a chance to sit and just think about what they wanted. And I've heard stories that, these employees have first went to their employers and said, I want this, or I want a more healthy life balance. And, can you provide to me that balance? Because I want to spend time with my family, quality time with my family, not drive-by time with my family. And many of the employers said, no, if you don't like it, tough, you can leave. And many of them went, fine, I'm leaving.
They did.
And I think at first they were like, that's fine, we can find another one of you. But here we are, it's 7 months into it, and we can't find anybody to replace them.
That's right. They can't find anyone to replace them. And they also are seeing the unevenness in the pandemic recovery as far as the different variants coming in and shutting down office places, for safety reasons. And so they need to adjust more towards that hybrid work environment, which is what people were demanding 6 months ago. They're doing it now, and they're revisiting the policies for the return to work. That's going to, probably go more into effect in the summer and the fall of this year.
I have a theory on this. I think that there's going to be a lot of companies that realize they don't need buildings. Yeah, they just don't. They don't need buildings to do business because they've been doing business for the last year and a half without buildings. And many businesses have realized a couple of different things. One, they're saving money because they aren't cooling and heating these buildings for all of these people. And there's been study after study after study that has said that our people are more effective when they're at home. We don't have as many sick days. Well, of course not. Of course you don't have as many sick days because, I mean, unless you are, really, really ill, if you have a cold, you can do it at your desk. Or if you have a sick child, you can take breaks. But of course, you're effective because it's now on your time. I mean, the flip side is what they've also discovered is that we work longer. We work from home. But I mean, there's a win-win to all of this. However, what I like the most about all of this is that people have started asking for what they want. They no longer feel as if the balance of power is not in their favor, and that they finally are starting to realize their worth.
That's right.
And I just that is my favorite part because I think for a very long time, probably decades, the balance of power were definitely not in the employee's hands. And
No.
and it's not in the company's best interest to tell the employee that you are indispensable. We couldn't do this without you. What company is going to tell them that?
No,
because then they have leverage. The employee suddenly has leverage.
that's right. This was a culture that favored the employer, not the employee. And so what the Great Resignation did is it flipped the script to now favor the employee a little bit more.
Yes, a
And
little bit more.
and to your earlier point about the inability of the employers to fill the roles that employees vacated, that's causing them to really perk up and decide what they're willing to flex on in benefits, in compensation, in location to retain and attract the best talent to their workplaces.
Which is a big deal for most employers because they are giving up something that they haven't traditionally had to give up before. Some people, it's not all about money. It really isn't. It's not all about money. I've heard of some people asking for more time off.
Yes,
I've I've heard more people asking for 4-day work weeks. Just simply getting creative or having a guaranteed time off, meaning the last 2 weeks of the year. They want to spend those 2 weeks of the year with, for the holidays with their families. The needs of everybody is a little bit different. But what I think is just amazing is that people are finally giving stock to their skills, just as you wrote, giving more weight to what they can actually do rather than what industry they do it in.
that's right. And I think they're seeing the compensation and benefits as like an a la carte menu
Yes.
of
Yes.
what's going to help, and the levers that the employee themselves, what levers they can pull on their work life balance to be happy. And they're going and negotiating that with the employer. And so the cards are back in the employer's hands, but they can do a lot if based on the feedback the employee's given. It's not a guessing game of what they need to do.
No. And like I said, every employee's needs are very different from one another. It shouldn't be one size fits all anymore.
That's right. No, and
Yeah.
I think that's, and we'll see that hopefully that trend continue in a positive way this year, next year, because I believe the hybrid environment is here to stay.
Oh, I would agree. I don't see those of us that used to travel for a living being road warriors like that, in like to that degree anymore, where, some of my colleagues were on planes every single week.
Right.
I was not. I was an every other week kind of traveler, but many of my friends, colleagues, whatnot, they had no problem reaching the highest status on planes. But I just don't think that we're going to see that, and I don't think that there's a lot of people that even want that anymore.
I
You know,
think
to
I
be
agree
that
with
road
you.
warrior.
I agree. I think the road warriors, it's going to be a term of the past.
Yes, yes. And I'm curious. This You wrote this book Skills because you wanted to help those generally that are in this time of change or pivot. What do you think about this new evolving change among women? Because women have, more than any other group, have left their jobs
Right.
and have decided to go chase their passions and start demanding more of what they want, speaking up and saying more about what they need and doing 180s. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, like we talked about, the pandemic provided people with an opportunity to think. And
Yes.
in that, women especially sees the moment, do I want to be working for someone else or myself? Do I have a creative pursuit? Is there something else where I could put my energy in? And so it's really exciting, right? This is a part of the economy that needed to be shooken up, and women are doing that. And so there are stories in the book of women who have taken the risk to start their own companies, or gone from larger companies to smaller companies because they wanted to find a role that made them happy. And so I hope that these examples can help more women make that change, because a lot of times the risk is what stops them from making the change.
Yeah. Or that horrible, and I know that we've said it before, that horrible imposter syndrome
Right.
that seems to plague all of us. It doesn't matter how accomplished we are, how educated, or whatever. It all seems to lurk in the back of our minds and rears its ugly head eventually.
And that's why identifying the skills is so important, because then it makes you less of an imposter. Once you realize I have the skills, I am like Jenny in the book. I am like Carter in the book. I am like Asia May in the book. And when you say that, like, I am that person, I have that same skill, I can do that same thing, then you build your own confidence and you build your credibility. Then you're no longer having that imposter syndrome that prevents you from taking that risk. So it's all about that identification that helps you feel more empowered to have change.
Is there a story in the book that specifically a woman that went from a big company and then suddenly decided to change and open her own, and you were like, "What in the world?" And maybe it was something that she'd always wanted to do but didn't think that she could do it, and then all of a sudden she finds herself doing it.
Yeah. So the story of my friend Anjali Nayak, we worked together in a nonprofit right after college. And she stayed there for a year, didn't really enjoy the work of like membership development, goes out to Hollywood, wants to work in the entertainment industry, lands at MGM Studios as a financial analyst. And she's like, I'm a cog in a wheel. This is terrible. So she starts on her own researching different models for streaming. Streaming was just coming out. This is about 20 years ago. And she then discovers a startup in New York who's working on streaming Bollywood movies. And she loves Bollywood movies. So she starts talking to them. They end up creating a co-founder role for her. She moves from LA to New York to join this startup. So there we go. Big company, small company. That was like big pivot there. She works with them for several years. She then goes back to the West Coast to join her fiance and lands at Google, but in a business unit that was just starting. It was the shopping express business unit. And so she got to see what it was like to be as like a startup unit within Google. And so it was such a contrast from her previous startup experience where like there's, scrappy, no resources, to like you have every resource in the world to experiment and to like do what you need to do to like get the product in people's hands. And so she has this contrasting experience. Fast forward now, about 10 years later, she's working with some of her former Google colleagues on an autonomous robot startup
Oh my
as a
goodness.
co-founder and COO. And so in that experience, she's working with a team that she trusts, they're all working remotely from their homes all over the country. They're building this hardware technology of an autonomous robot that delivers food. And she's doing work on go-to-market, on public relations, on customer interactions and implementation. And it's great. She's like hit her stride based on these previous experiences working in large and small companies, understanding the levers that you can pull, the playbooks that you have for customer experience, and bringing that together in this new role. And she herself at the end of her story, she comments like it's building upon those previous experiences. It's what's making her successful in the role now, again as a co-founder.
I love that story because if you step back and look at her different roles, outside of herself, they have nothing to do with each other.
That's right.
Absolutely nothing. The common denominator is her.
That's
So
exactly right. And like me, we're both very operational savvy. And so we both have worked in operations in different sectors, different industries, but we could always call each other with a problem and bounce ideas off each other. And so it's amazing to see how she's taken that to progress in her career and land where she is now.
I think that's so amazing because she had the inner strength to say, you know what, I have all of these skills. I can do whatever I want with them.
Yes. That's right. And I can do it wherever I want. So what I loved about her story was she zigzagged back and forth, East Coast, West Coast for the last 20 years, kind of chasing the job, chasing the opportunity, but she never let geography be her boundary.
That's so cool. I wonder how many people are sitting there thinking that, I can't do this in this industry anymore. And I'm hoping that hearing this will encourage them to take their skills, which are extremely valuable, and go chase them in somewhere that they will feel more fulfilled.
Exactly. And now with so many companies posting remote roles, I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, you could literally I actually have made a joke and I was like, as long as there is Wi-Fi on the moon, I can live on the moon.
Exactly.
I think that it just opens up this world of opportunity to allow you to think creatively about, well, what do I want to do?
We
What am I really, really good at?
I think
And
start with that first, right?
mhm.
What do I enjoy doing? What am I good at? What do I want to do? Who can help me make that happen?
Yeah, I think that that is so wonderful because, I mean, the pandemic has taken a lot from us, but it's also given us a lot too.
I agree.
And I think it's given us a lot of opportunity to reshape our lives, rethink about how we want the next half of our lives to look, and give us the opportunity to design it rather than being that cog in the wheel, because there is nothing worse than feeling like, I'm just part of the machine.
That's right. No, and that's the worst. That's the worst feeling. Like everyone, we've all had that moment in our careers. We're like, am I just the cog here? And so I think to step back, if you feel that way, and take stock of your skills and then put yourself in a position where you can succeed, that's the best feeling in the world.
Oh my gosh, that is just so fantastic. If the listeners want to get access to your book, where can they get it?
Great question, Audra. So they can find it on Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes and Noble, and Kobo. Anywhere books are available online, they'll find Skills the Common Denominator available for sale.
And then you are also a career strategist. So if they would like to connect with you for advice, for help as they're trying to design their ideal next fit, how would they reach you?
So they can actually find me on ResMarket, ResMRKT.com. And I offer career coaching, resume reviews, and LinkedIn profile reviews through their site.
That is fantastic. Please, everybody, take her up on this, because if you are miserable and you're feeling like you're stuck, you're really not stuck. You're really not. You have so much to offer. Take her up on it. I bet you that she will discover skills about you that you didn't even know were marketable. So make sure that you connect with her, pick up her book, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I will make sure that you're connected. I want to thank you all for listening, and we will see you again next time. That's our show. Thank you all so much for spending your time with me and continuing to support this show, this community, and our endeavor to change the world one interview at a time. If you have any ideas for a new show or for a guest that you'd like me to interview, please reach out to me at audra@womeninthearena.net. Thank you again for all of your support, and we'll see you again next time.
This is just the beginning.
That's our show. I am so grateful for each and every one of you and your unwavering support and your continued belief in this movement that has become much bigger than me, much bigger than just a podcast. It has become this forward momentum that we are all doing together. If you are ready, or you know somebody that is ready to tell your story and share your value with the world, please connect with me. You can reach me at audra@womeninthearena.net. I am so honored and thankful that you will share your story with me, and I'll make sure that it is well taken care of. I will never stop thanking each and every one of you, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next week as we share another woman's story and we celebrate her doing extraordinary things in plain sight. We'll see you next time.